welcome to everybody else that has joined the session today. I don't have any graphics to show you, so I'm going to talk through it as best as possible, and I'm going to try and animate it as best as possible, seeing that we don't have a presentation to go by. Right, so contactless payments, as I'm sure some of us on the call here do know, but a quick recap. Essentially, this is powered by something we call NFC, which is near field communication, and transactions essentially take place over something called a radio frequency identification, RFID, right? And this RFID effectively allows a card or a smartphone to communicate with a payment reader at close range. 10 centimeters or less. That's effectively what contactless payments are. And it's important for us to understand that because we do get a lot of questions around security, etc. And really due to COVID, what we've seen a great uptake and an acceleration of digital payments, particularly contactless payments. So what we expected to happen 4-5 years from now is literally happening today. And we see that banks and retailers around the world are really responding to this COVID-19 pandemic fears by raising the limits on their contactless card transactions. In South Africa, we have it as 500 Rand, and then you have to input a PIN, etc. But effectively, they're raising the limits of these contactless payments and transactions to allow people to go about their day-to-day lives with ease and seamlessly. So besides these contactless card payments that we've also seen some contactless mobile payment apps such as Apple Pay, such as Android Pay, such as Samsung Pay. And really, we've seen quite a great affinity and an uptake of these contactless card payment apps coming through as well that are effectively enabled by NFC-enabled devices that we all need to have to be able to use these capabilities. So we've seen this increased uptake, right, by both large and small retailers of these we've also seen QR code uptake as well, which effectively uses an app on your mobile phone to scan a QR code at a merchant. Now, we hear a lot about how QR codes have scaled, particularly in the Asian countries, etc. And the question is always, how do we get the same sort of effort and cadence to be replicated across different geographies? And I think it's important to understand that the regulator, retailers, banks, everybody needs to be part of this payment value chain effectively for us to see that same level of uptake. But effectively, these QR code payments, much like contactless payments, ensure that there is no physical contact and that the customer convenience is really, really high. It's important for us to note that financial inclusion is a big thing, particularly on the African continent. I was excited when the previous speaker was talking about remittances, etc., because we really need to encourage the socioeconomic sort of development of our continent, particularly as we all try to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So effectively, one of the things that we've seen, and I'd like to share a few stats that we've seen in the South African context, particularly from card associations such as MasterCard and Visa, that are really reporting 40% growth in contactless transactions globally. And that was really even last year's reporting. So you can imagine what we're seeing now in 2021. And really, these insights show us that grocery and pharmacy trends are really leading and driving the rise of these contactless payments, because these are day-to-day needs and necessities that all of us are consuming, regardless of whether we are in lockdown or not. Right now, this drive towards digital payments and really lowering this resilience on cash is not new for a lot of markets, particularly on the continent as well. But there's several mechanisms really that are in place to enable this for banks, for card companies, fintech businesses, retailers, all involved in really rolling out these digital capabilities. And we know there's a lot of trends that we're picking up, not just around contactless payments, but when we talk about the big O and the big B, open banking, a lot of people think it's new. But I always say to people, we've had open banking for over a decade now, similar to the likes of blockchain. We've had blockchain now for years, right? But because of what we're going through today, we see that there's a lot more focus around some of these capabilities and these technologies and really how we can use them in facilitating digital payments on a day-to-day basis. Now, I want to take a minute and just talk you through one of these capabilities that I think has got so much scale and possibility for the African continent. We all know that low-cost digital payment acceptance is a big deal. It's a big deal across the entire continent. And what we've seen banks or tech companies, etc., really roll out these physical point of sale machines, etc. But there's a new era that is coming in, an era of soft POS, an era of low-cost payment acceptance devices, an era that says, how do I enable you to accept digital payments without the headache of having the initial capital to buy that point of sale machine or even to rent it, but also the monthly service fee, etc., that go with it, because that is really complex. Think about the tuk-tuks in Kenya, think about the spice merchant in Malaysia. Really, honestly, do we want to put them through that administrative burden, right, of accepting digital payments by making them jump all these hoops? And really, what we've tried to do is make sure that we cut out the headache, cut out the complexity, and effectively be part of 18 countries globally that are currently piloting something called Tap on Phone. And effectively, what this does is it allows me and you to convert our phones, right? Particularly Android, our phones into point of sale acceptance devices. So you don't need an extra dongle, you don't need an extra device. Effectively, the phone that you have in your pocket, the so-called supercomputer, is the one that effectively accepts payments and acts as that intermediary between yourself and the customer. Now, I really, really think this is revolutionary. And a lot of people always ask, but what about the security? Is it safe? And believe it or not, it uses the same security protocols that we normally use on other physical point of sale devices. So I think it's really, really critical for us to understand what this means and the opportunities that it presents. I think about events, I think about soccer matches, I think about market stalls and stands, I think about going into a store, you pick out your groceries, your clothes, whatever the case may be, and you don't have to stand in the queue, but effectively you check out whilst you're in the aisle because somebody has got a phone with them and effectively allow you to check out. This is the era that we are moving into, making it quick, making it easy, making it seamless, but most importantly, making it attractive for the merchants. The one thing we know about payments is it's no good if one part of the value chain is advanced and mature and the other part isn't. And that's why we grapple quite a bit with digitizing cash payments, because the end-to-end value chain is not mature enough to allow everybody to participate fully. And I think all of us that have been in this industry for a very long time know that. So in communities where there's a high reliance on cash, we know that we have to empower the merchants to accept digital payments. Then the uptake is going to be there. And this is really what we are driving at, to say, let's make sure that digital payment acceptance is acceptable and it's available to everybody, right? And I really think that there's a couple of things that we really need to make sure we have in check, right, to drive digital payments, whether we're talking about mandating interoperability or providing support through industry-led initiatives. It's important in every country, particularly when we begin to talk about open banking, open share, open data, open finance, and how we create regional groups and teams that allow us to do that. Because at the end of the day, I always say to people, when you follow through open banking and how it started, it's really about the customer, right? It's really about saying, let's empower the customer and give them the power of choice. The only way I can give you the power of choice is by transparently and accurately presenting the options that are available. Now, in industries or in countries where there's monopolies, you can imagine those that have dominated don't want to do that. But open banking really says, let's strip that all away. Let's give the customer choice. Let them choose who they want to engage with, how they want to engage. They own themselves, they own their data. And effectively, we open up a whole myriad of questions that regulators are trying to solve right now. Who owns the customer? Who owns the data? Where does liability sit in the instance that there is a breach? All these questions need to be answered, but we cannot stop the wheels that are turning with the customers who are demanding hyper personalization, right? Hyper personalization of their finances. And that's why we see a lot of these tech giants and tech companies coming into financial services and really making headway because of that great digital led customer experience that they're effectively opening up for the customer. So when we talk about open banking, there's other things that come to the fray, whether it's digital identity. There's a couple of countries that are talking about it, regulators are talking about it. And I really, really do think it's exciting again, because it allows us to present the best possible products and solutions for the customer. Don't get me wrong, it's a difficult task for traditional financial services, businesses, etc., but it's one that we must embrace. It's one that we must strive, but most importantly, it is one that we must champion.
Chipo, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Of course, one thing I must say, looking even at your title and your role, I want to commend you, because these are sectors which have always been considered as male-dominated areas. Anytime I'm chairing any panel and there's a lady doing this, I must applaud you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I want to also tell the participants that your presentation will be shared after this. It can be emailed, it can be wired through different ways, and that will be delivered. So if there are any questions, we'll definitely be able to read some of them over the Q&A tab or the chat box, and then we'll be able to raise them over as they come through. Chipo, I want to ask you a quick one. Pierce presented earlier on, and he mentioned the issue of the importance of shifting from selling products to offering solutions to the needs of the people that we are targeting. I'd like to hear from you when it comes to the future of payments, the trends in Africa. What can you report to us today? You know, how is the acceptability? How is the whole process of putting all this innovation together? Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities for those who are watching you right now?
Geez, that question in itself is like 10 hours of talk. But effectively, let's just start where you started. And I think it's really critical to say, let's not just present products, but make it solutions. And other trends and topical things that we're seeing is something called embedded finance, right? Classic example is Uber, and I trust that all of us have used Uber. But the fact that you're able to pay seamlessly in that Uber app without even thinking twice, right? That you're actually making a payment. So embedded finance effectively encompasses a lot of capabilities that we might call trends of one thing or the other. But so for me, I'm watching out for embedded finance opportunities. And that effectively speaks to open banking as well. I'm watching out for blockchain technologies and how we can use that to drive digital identity, because it's important from a payment perspective. We need to validate you are who you say you are. We need to validate a payment against your identity, etc. That is extremely important. We think about other sort of advancement that we see, like ISO 2022, etc. Those are important as well, because that data that we see coming through those messaging standards is important for us to be able to do things like real-time payments. You want to know that when I pay, you're going to get your money right now. Effectively, that's what it's about. So we need the technology and the governments to drive that consistently across the continent.
Right. Chipo, one last question. I mean, it's a perception. We've seen, changing culture is a very different and difficult thing in many cases. And of course, with this new innovation, it requires some cultural change. Some people are used to working with bulk of money to really show that they are, wealthy and they have the money, but others would prefer to do, cashless payments. And there's been this notion that when you're sending or paying through cashless means you end up spending more unknowingly than when you have the bills and the bucks. You feel the pain of counting all that money and you give it to someone. So talk to me a bit about the culture change and how significant that will be in the acceptability of these new innovations that you're working with.
So it's a good point, but I really do think that one thing that COVID-19 or the pandemic has shown us is that really people are adaptable and people can actually change overnight if there's impetus and if there is a reason for them to change and adapt. And I really think this is why personal management finance tools become really important. So even though I'm doing digital payments, I should be able to see it, whether it's on my watch or on my
Yeah.
phone. I should be able to see in real time how much I'm spending, where I'm spending it, etc., and be able to link that back to any form of budgeting thresholds that I've put
Yeah.
for myself, either actively or ones that are suggested by
Yeah.
AI, machine learning, as we put them in there. So some of those things are important to drive that culture change that we are talking about.
Thank you, Chipo. Thank you very much for your time. I think, unless if you have a parting shot to those who are in this particular session, then I'll give you the floor.
No, I wanted to say thank you very much. It's I do understand it hasn't been the greatest to do it without a presentation, but thank you so much for the opportunity and look forward to the rest of the sessions today.